was the last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and I'd like to thank our guests for coming back on our show, Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiakowski. Thank you so much for joining us today on another edition of the platform.
Thanks for having me.
I want to just jump right into it because I want to pick your mind, because you having a military background, maybe you can make some sense out of all of this nonsense. What is going on in the Trump administration and their drive and their push to act as international pirates off the coast of Venezuela, and this so-called fight against narco-terrorism with Venezuela?
Yeah, well, there isn't any narco-terrorism, but they're following the playbook that we've seen over and over again. And I thought we were done with it after Iraq. But this is right out of the George W. Bush, Dick Cheney playbook. You know, you create an imaginary threat and you beat it to death over and over, propagandize it, and that's what they've been doing. They've been very it's a neocon playbook, and they've been very disciplined with this thing they're doing in Venezuela. They have repeated the story over and over. Whenever they're called out, they just pile on. Okay, so narco terror. Well, first off, there's any narco terror coming out of Venezuela, but narco terror itself, you know, is kind of a created thing. We have drugs illegally imported into the United States because there's a huge market for illegal drugs in the United States. So, you know, this has been at play for quite some time. CIA has actually helped build this in previous decades, as we well know. So, but the terror part was an add-on after 9/11. Everything that the government didn't like is terror. So, you know, it could be Islamic terror. If you're talking about something Israel wants, it has to be Islamic terror or Iran terror. In this hemisphere, narco terror fits because we have, you know, that's something you can sell to the American people because they do understand that cocaine comes from 3 countries in South America. Venezuela is not one of them. And fentanyl has been a big scary thing because fentanyl can be scary, especially if you're a cop or somebody working in a hospital. You know, this fentanyl you can't see it. Very little will kill you, all this. So fentanyl is fascinating. We've kind of used up fentanyl because we blamed China for fentanyl. And it's a little hard to, you know, pull it away from China and throw it into, you know, Venezuela. But they did that. Because people they don't have time to pay attention. So they're following the Iraq 2002 playbook. It is a neocon playbook, and what they're doing is a neoconservative empire building, take the oil, control the currency, you know, make sure everybody is still favoring the dollar, even though the dollar is quite vulnerable and unpopular, as it should be, you know, as a debt-backed currency by America's faith and trust. What faith and trust does the world have in the United States of America? Well, we've pissed it away, quite frankly. We might have had some at some time. We have wasted it. So the next best thing to keep people on the dollar is to control the oil and control countries that have resources, and then force those resources on the dollar. So again, replay of 2002. So if you were around then, if you were like an adult and you're paying attention in 2002 or 2001, anytime after 9/11 or before 9/11, you've seen this before. But if you weren't there, we weren't paying attention to what was happening then, or you were just a child, or maybe you weren't even born. This is like, oh, okay, I see what, you know, he has a strategy, you know, he's trying to defend America, put America first, fight drugs, fight narco terror, fight terror. But if you're our age, you know, we've seen it before. This is not honest. It's not a real justification. It is a cover story for what our foreign policy under, let's just name them, Clinton. I blame Clinton, Yugoslavia, come on. Bush 1 or Bush 2, Bush 43, who came after him? Obama, same thing. I mean, Obama actually liberated presidents after him. We can go kill people now. We can go kill Americans with drones around the world if they provide a threat to America, according to me, the president, and any of my advisors that happen to be whispering in my ear that day. So he liberated all past presidents from that, because we said, oh, that's okay. Obama's doing it. It must be okay. So then all the rest of the presidents continued with that. And then you have Trump first term. What did Trump first term do? Assassinated people with drones, just like Obama. Kept on going with this thing. Now he did want to get out of Afghanistan, but only because the mission of restoring all the poppy exports that Afghanistan had already been accomplished. What more was there to gain? Anyway, so that's Trump 1. Then you got Biden. Biden's all about whatever Biden was about. I don't know if he was even running the place, but the same criminals around him were pushing the same policies. Nothing changed. He could have said, well, of course, in Biden's case, he couldn't really say that. He loved every war he ever got to vote on in the Senate. So he actually wasn't fooling us. We knew who Biden was when it comes to empire. He loved it. He loved to benefit from it. He loved to pursue it. And then MAGA Trump comes in, the real MAGA, like he said, oh, I learned about the neoconservatives. I won't have them in my administration. Really? You did? Are you kidding me? He didn't learn a thing. He didn't change a thing. And now he's all about, we're going to regrow and re-strengthen the empire. And we're going to start with the Western Hemisphere. We're going to control North and South America, including, and we're going to get Denmark too, or what? No, Iceland, Greenland. What is it that he wants? Greenland. We're going to go from Greenland all the way down to Chile and what's the other country on the other side of Chile? Patagonia coast. We're going to take that. Argentina will have all of that. And this strategy, it sounds childlike. It sounds idiotic, right? That why would do? But this is American foreign policy. It is in play. It hadn't changed one bit. These people who have voted, all of us who vote, and I'm no longer voting. I'm done with it. But the people who vote, they always vote in my whole entire lifetime, even the Kennedy-Nixon election, which was very close. People debate how if that was a fair election, is as fair as any of them. But they always vote for the person who advocates more peace and more America first. It doesn't matter if you call it America first, but keeping American resources for Americans. Let's do good for American people who are living in our country. Let's make it better. And let's not have war, and let's not seek war. And every single candidate who advocated for that got elected. I don't care what party they were in. So they know the game. We, the people, are getting, we're being played. We've been played for a long time. And we're still being played. And I think the only good thing about Trump and his wars and his idiocy and his lying, he lies so obviously, which is fun because, a lot of them, they all lie. But some of them, sometimes they lie very officially, and they seem to have gravitas when they lie. So we think, oh, well, they know something we don't know. Trump doesn't do that. Trump just blows it out his mouth. He's like big time. And it's entertaining if it wasn't so serious. But it helps people understand the important things, that the government always lies, and that it has a consistent foreign policy, which is to take resources from other countries, do it through war, through force, through sanctions, that it has a desire to not participate in a world of nations as maybe one of the most powerful ones. Maybe. I don't think we are the most powerful nation anymore, but in their minds, Washington thinks that they are. But instead of participating from a position of strength and a good economy, perhaps, I don't think it's that good, but comparatively, maybe. Instead of that, no, we have to run it. We have to be on top. Everybody they have to serve us. That has not changed. I don't care who we elect. It doesn't change. And it's disturbing. It's quite disturbing because, how many times do you have to go to a presidential election or any election? Because Congress is even worse. We never get what we want out of Congress. I don't care who gets elected. Same story every time. But how many times do we have to go to a 4-year presidential election and find out the same thing happens. How many elections does that take? For me, I would have to say 4. It took 4 times of me paying attention to realize that not only nothing changes, but we have a foreign policy. It is a foreign policy of empire. It is rapacious. It is war loving. It depends on war. It requires us, all of us, to pay for it and to suffer from it. And we get no benefit from it. But that's our foreign policy. No matter who you vote for, that's what you get. So it took me about 4 times. And I'm slow. Maybe I'm a slow learner. I think the younger people, the younger generation, and certainly this is another side benefit of Trump. He did have he had appeal across the parties. He had independents coming in who usually wouldn't vote. So they're now getting told, they're now recognizing, wait a minute, I came to vote because I wanted something different. And this guy promised it. And he basically gave me the exact same refried beans I got before. So they are recognizing it, and they're smarter. Independents and people that don't vote are smarter than the people that cling to the parties. So they maybe won't take 4 times of voting to realize it. But the younger people who got excited maybe about MAGA, or maybe they got excited about, the younger people have their own leaders. And, we think it's Charlie Kirk, unfortunately, who got publicly, that was a demonstration kill, which was very effective. But a guy like Charlie Kirk, there's a lot of people who, they say, oh, Charlie Kirk was a right-wing Zionist, Republican or whatever. But really he wasn't. He was a thinking person. And when he thought too much, they took him out. And that doesn't go unnoticed by the people that were maybe became interested in politics because Charlie came to their university, and people started talking about things that they normally don't talk about. So, and they got rid of him. They had to cancel him out. So that's a good sign. They're afraid of the younger people. They're afraid of the younger generation. They are afraid of anybody that questions. That's good. They're kind of on the run. But the foreign policy stays the same. And that foreign policy requires us to be obedient. It requires us to work and contribute massively to the military state that drives everything. The force they bring abroad is the force they're bringing home. The way Charlie was killed. I mean, my God, it was so controlled. I mean, it's one thing to just get like, you remember Hastings, Michael Hastings, Rolling Stone guy. So he's doing his own work. He's doing some research. He must have uncovered something. I know his current story that never was published, never released, right before he had this controlled car wreck in San Francisco, I think, or someplace in California where he lived. But he had just done a really powerful piece on the general, 3-star general that was running Afghanistan. And that guy's a freak. So the story was freaky. I mean, it was in the Rolling Stones. It was very interesting. It was very fascinating. It was honest. It had a lot of, he stayed with him. He traveled with him for 3 weeks. They talked to everybody. Had great stories. It was good. And it caused the guy to, the general had to quit. I mean, he was getting ready to be fired because he had said stuff that you can't do and can't say. And it was exposed. And I think if Obama didn't fire me, quit, it was the same thing. So that's effective journalism. Wish we had more of that, right? One story and we can get rid of a bad guy. Not that you can't replace him with another worse guy, but whatever. But his next story was on the CIA. And if it was anything, if Hastings did any kind of journalistic work that was on par with what he had just done, his previous story, which I'm sure everybody will be reading his next story, because his previous story in that summer was fantastic and effective and caused people to talk and think. And they got rid of him. I say they got rid of him. Well, I mean, Michael Hastings' story, do you people know? I mean, does anybody know the Michael Hastings? It's a fascinating story, but I can rephrase it. I can just make it really short.
Okay.
He drove like a grandma. He was adventurous in journalism, but not in driving. He drove like a grandma. He always drove below the speed limit, which is infuriating to anybody who doesn't drive like that. So all his friends and his spouse knew, they knew how he drove. But then one night, before the CIA article was finished and provided, I guess, because it was never published after his death, one night he's driving along and his car accelerates up to 130 miles an hour, and it blows through about 4. It's at night, so there's not a lot of traffic. It's like 10 o'clock or something. Not a huge amount of traffic, but the road cameras caught it. And he blows through about 4 stoplights, and then it swerves, goes off, hits a tree or something, hits some barrier on the sidewalk, and then there's a massive explosion, and the explosion is so big that the engine of the car, the big solid part, was found something like 100 feet away. Now, first off, let's just figure a normal car wreck, 130 mile an hour, impact a tree. Yeah, there may be fire and there may be debris, but the whole engine doesn't blow out 100 feet away and sit there. Like when you have to tape the thing off, you have to take the crime scene off. You get this massive area. But anyway, so and this is about the time, both before and after, that the CIA, which was the topic of his next story, was talking about. Oh yeah, we can take charge of any computer in any car and make it do whatever we want. So yeah, okay, he was whacked, and there's anybody who looks at that story and knows the context and knows who Michael Hastings was can say, well, he was taken out. But my point in telling that story is he was taken out in a way that could easily be blamed on an accident. 95% of the people who heard about that said, oh, isn't that sad? Michael Hastings had an accident. And then they don't revisit it anymore, and that's the end of that story. And that worked out good. But with Kirk, we got a demonstration kill. I don't know who was actually demonstrating their power, but the power was being demonstrated. Now, we do know Netanyahu denied it twice before most people on the planet even knew he'd been killed. And Netanyahu's up on public TV, made multiple denials. So I didn't do it. Well, how funny that is. Why would you think we would suspect you, Mr. Netanyahu? Oh, maybe you do. Anyway, this empire always, when they start collapsing, they become very militaristic. We're there. We've been collapsing for a long time. We're very militaristic. But these weapons of war, and the justification, it's narco terror. Do you think they could come after somebody about narco terror inside of the United States and blow up houses? Well, we've been doing it for 25 years, but that could increase, that narco terror label. The federal government can come and blow your house up for narco terror or blow your car up. This is acceptable now. This is all part of what's allowed. And we're in bad shape. We're in bad shape because I don't see. Okay, Trump isn't asking Congress about, can I invade Venezuela? Can I blow up ships and kill people and shoot survivors off the side, which is all against Constitution. It's against domestic law. It's against international law. And he's not asking anybody, but some in Congress are saying, well, we want you to ask us. We want you to ask us. And if Rand Paul and some of these other guys are able to get some sort of statement, yeah, Trump has to come to us before he does it. Who's going to put money on that the Congress is going to say no? Good, I wouldn't bet on that. Congress will say, yes, you can, sir, because we like oil. We like everything the way it is. We're blackmailed by this and that and beholden to this other. So, yeah, we think you should go ahead and, Maduro is such an evil guy, such a bad guy. We have to do it so we can put our little friend in, Machado. Oh, and she had a Nobel Peace Prize. How was that arranged? Anyway, I know you don't want me to talk about this, but it bothers me. It's disturbing.
And it's amazing that she comes out of nowhere with a Nobel Peace Prize and no one had ever heard of her before. That's right. And this big story about how she is fighting for democracy when the Carter Center had verified, the President Carter's Center for Democracy had verified that Venezuela had some of the most freest and fairest elections in the entire world. And so this discredits the so-called tyrant, thug, or regime quotes that they use against them. But why do you think, Colonel, that his base, the ones that we're talking about America first, no more foreign entanglements, no more wars, why do you think that they're buying this used car that he's selling as something brand new?
Yeah, well, his popular base, if you want to say like all those regular people that don't normally get heavily involved in politics, but they show up for a presidential election. They say, well, I'm gonna vote for this guy. I like his message better than this other guy. those guys realize they got the shaft. None of those guys, you go out, talk to those people, they're either not talking about Trump, they're not talking about MAGA, or if they are talking about MAGA, they're saying, yeah, I wish we had it. They recognize that they don't, that it, whatever was promised by Trump on all those rallies he did and everything. Yeah, those guys are not with him, but those guys never had political power. They weren't part of the party organization. He didn't reach out into some small podunk town had a really strong MAGA guy who, really got out the vote and said, oh, why don't you come up and advise me? He didn't get that. He got the same advisors that they all get. Many of them are neocons, but this time what's obvious, when I say neocon, I'm not talking, people say, oh, neocons, that's anti-Semitic, neoconservatism, you must be talking about Jew. No, neoconservatism is a foreign policy approach that does prioritize Israel, but it does so in a way that it says, well, we want to make sure that the Middle East is stable for oil, for the dollar supremacy, for all that stuff. And Israel is a tool. So yeah, we want Israel and we want them to fight our wars if we can get them to. We'll fight their wars if it helps our larger. That's neoconservatism. Are there a lot of Zionist Jews that adhere to that? Sure there are. Why wouldn't they? If you're a Zionist, you're going to want anything that helps, get your country's, which is Israel, your country. If you're a Zionist, your country is Israel. Okay. I don't know whatever else is going on there, but the Israeli firsters are really not even neoconservatives because they don't consider America's interest. Okay. So his top three donors were Adelson, Mrs. Adelson, who inherited her money from Las Vegas. So she's the head of the Adelson cadre. Her husband died in between his administrations because they donated to him last time too, when he ran in 2016. But so she's one of the biggest donors. Of course, there's a couple other big ones. I can't remember their names, but I think one of the biggest donors to the Trump campaign this last time was the OnlyFans owner. The guy that owns the OnlyFans. I mean, I'm sorry, but he's I can't remember the guy's name that owns OnlyFans, but he's a huge political donor to Zionist causes and to Trump. And there's a couple others, but the top 3 or 4, it's not your average American. It's not like, if you think back to when Ross Perot ran back against the 3-way race where Clinton was first elected, Ross Perot, he was like a patriot dude. He made a ton of money off the government, military contracting and things like that, and oil. He did different things, but he had his own money. So you didn't, his donors he pretty much self-funded, and his donors were people that liked his Ross Perot message. I don't know if I don't recall him having a bunch of AIPAC money coming into the Ross Perot campaign, and he didn't need it. But nowadays, you need lots of money, and AIPAC and Israeli donors put their money on Trump. And why wouldn't they? I mean, seriously, most Americans, look, where do Jewish people live? In the heartland? Well, they're scattered around. You might know some, but most Americans, they like Jewish people. They don't know much about them. They don't think much about Israel unless they go to a Christian Zionist church where they're obsessed with it. But otherwise, most Americans, they got nothing pro or con. But if you look at the world of politics, Jewish Americans become exceptionally important, financially important, network important, media important, in so many ways. And so Trump is surrounded by these important people, these important funders whose primary issue is Israel. And he surrounded himself with these advisors, people that think the way he does. For some strange reason, he has kept, I shouldn't say strange, he's got 2 people that in his administration that I kind of think are a value added to this country. And that is Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. I think these guys are value added. But do you know both of those people are Zionists also? Mm-hmm. Strong Zionists. And they're not working in an area where, American Zionism as our foreign policy is really an issue. I mean, Tulsi has been sidelined because she actually said something back when he was bombing Iran that Trump didn't want to hear. And Trump and the people around Trump said, no, we don't want to hear that. And what was that, I wonder? Oh, they're not building nuclear weapons, but I'm going to bomb them up anyway. And then after the fact, well, it looks like maybe you didn't get them all. He didn't want to hear that either. So she's been sidelined, but she is a Zionist. So there are no people that represent 98% of the American population in Washington talking to policymakers. Same goes for Congress, which is why only 2 Congress people, I think, refused to take APAC donations. Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Greene's out the door. Greene's out the door next month. I mean, she quit early. And Massey's got, I don't know, this massive multi-million-dollar primary running against him. They're trying to get Massey out. So they can't tolerate any alternative voices in Congress. That's our government. It is separate. It is air-gapped between the people of this country and their interests and the interest of Washington. So we got a big problem.
Yeah, I remember talking to the former 2-time Congresswoman, the Honorable Cynthia McKinney, and she said that to be a congresswoman or congressman, you have to pledge allegiance to Israel. And she said she did not do that. So her next go up for Congress is Israel, or the APAC ran a special candidate who was a black candidate in her district against her, who was pro-Zionist, to unseat her or whatever. And she was unseated, but then by the will of the people, they voted her back in. That's how she became a 2-time Congresswoman. And this is a lot of things that a lot of people don't know, that you have to pledge your allegiance to AIPAC or to Israel, or which is absolutely crazy if this is supposed to be a foreign entity. And it's supposed to be against U.S. law, but it seems like these laws are retractable, and they use them whenever suited, and they discard them wherever they're not beneficial to their plans. But I wanted to ask you, with what's going on in Venezuela, and how it is also an attack on Russia, China, and Iran, because it is trying to, first of all, if America gets the oil, she can still have a say in the changing of worlds, because we're living in a change of global paradigms right now. And to get the largest proven oil reserves, you will still have a say with dollar supremacy, and it would undermine China's investments in the West and Russia's investment, and also Cuba. I was saying this long before anybody mentioned this. I was saying that this was also a stealth attack on Cuba, and how it's also to undermine the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or what we call the Global South. How is that, and why aren't any of the so-called media, so-called legitimate media, reporting on it? Why aren't they saying anything about it?
American media is useless there. I mean, they all take the government story, and it's hilarious that the Post and the New York Times are complaining that the Pentagon kicked them out, like they were going to do independent reporting. All they ever do is report exactly what the Pentagon wants them to say, and they've always done that. So it's hypocritical of them. It's, to whine about not having that access. They are the mouthpieces of the state, just like most domestic media. But yeah, you're absolutely right, because, and this is something that I wasn't even thinking about so much, because I focus. Okay, I figure it's a resource grab. It's clearly we've been trying to unseat Maduro, or anybody who even his predecessor. We've always been trying to have a friendly dictator rather than an elected person in Venezuela. We've been doing that for a long time. So I saw that coming. But what I didn't see, that this is, as you said, they're trying to use Central and South America as almost like a physical base, a wedge. And they will, obviously they want to reduce Chinese influence. And of course, the way the Chinese do it, Russia to some extent, but China has a much bigger economy, much bigger way of doing it. They influence countries around the world, developing economies and others. I mean, obviously we're heavily, we are our biggest consumer that China has, but around the world where they don't have industrial development as like they'd like, or they've got other things, China comes in and helps. It helps. Now, you could say, well, they're just Chinese, they're Asian colonialism. So you could say that, but they don't behave that way. Their government doesn't, they don't allow billionaire lobbyists in there. You know, the billionaires and trillionaires, if there are any in China, there's a many billionaires who, you know, business people and whatnot, and they have to behave with the government, whereas our billionaires own the government. You know, in China they have them, but the Chinese political system, I don't know if it's still considered communist or however communism has evolved, but they consider themselves seriously as working for the people. Now, you could ask the people at the bottom, and they may say, yeah, I don't think it works for me, right? You could ask any person in any country, does my government work for me? Most of them would say, not really. But in China, this is still more prevalent. So billionaires, maybe the government's just jealous of them or afraid they'll come in and do what they do in this country, you know, run policy. But they're held, you know, remember Jack Ma?
Mm-hmm.
He disappeared for a while. I wonder where he went. Yeah. Yeah. This is how they discipline and control and monitor and watch. They're billionaires. So the state of China, the government of China and all of its various resources helps these countries and invests in these countries and does training and does trade and builds markets. Now you could say, well, that's what the Western colonials do. We build markets. We're very much more extractive. I think the Chinese are less extractive and more into the building of customers. And in a long range plan, you can see why China would want to do that. China does not want the United States to be its biggest and only consumer, right? Or trade partner. They want broad trade. They're smart. That's what anybody would want, right? Because when the U.S. empire fails, you don't want to take 35% of your economy with it, right? You don't want to be tied into that. So China's plan is positive, much more welcomed, and it's less militaristic. In fact, it's drastically less militaristic. We come in and say, let's train your officers. And 15 years later, those officers conduct a coup in your country. We've done that multiple times in South America. We've done it in Africa. I don't know how many times, many times, and around the world. You know, we train your political sector, and then we own them, and then they take over, and then we extract wealth. That's a different approach that China takes. Russia, I think, is much smaller economy. They have things, they have raw materials, they have skill sets, they have engineers, they have all kinds of, so they help in a similar way. It's not exactly the way China does it. And there's a lot of arms sales. Russia does do a lot of arms sales. China does too. And China will do more. China didn't do a bunch of arms sales, but now that they are really doing some fantastic, impressive military production at low cost, I would say 20 years from now, everybody's going to own Chinese war material, which is unfortunate because what do we need to fight wars with? But whatever. So anyway, very different. But China's been successful in South America, just as it's been successful around the world with doing this. Russia has long had trade partnerships with the socialist, Marxist, quasi-communist, whatever left governments in South and Central America. Russia has long had those relationships, and those relationships are nurtured. You know, it's not like American relationships. You know, we send down some political hack, and then we don't like what he does, we send another guy. China builds them, and Russia builds them. They put people there who form relationships. This is how the world's supposed to work, and Russia and China do this. So, and we don't do this. We don't even know how to do this. We're not even, our politicians, they don't even understand what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? They don't get that. So we use war. We use threats, war, and coups. So that's been our approach. We're not welcome, right? I mean, what country you come in, you're not bearing gifts. You're bearing bribes and threats. So Russia's been successful there. China's been successful there. Trump's like, oh, I own this. It's a new Monroe Doctrine. Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which he hasn't even written down, the Trump corollary. What is the Trump corollary? He calls it a corollary. There's no words that go with it. But basically means he can do whatever he wants in the Western Hemisphere. And going after Venezuela with the resources that it has, using our Navy, which is about all we can really effectively use. You know, we do have the naval capability to blockade. And I think we just seized last week, they seized a tanker. We see the U.S. Navy seized a Venezuelan oil tanker, or one that was going to Venezuela. I'm not sure. So we're forming a blockade that our Navy is capable as is of doing that. So, you know, this is, we only have the tools that we have, and that's what we're doing. So yes, it is about a global reset. He wants to own kick out China as much as he can, reduce Russia's influence as much as he can in this area. And he sees that as okay. He thinks that's something that's going to make America safer. And Trump has no idea of the interrelationships of the world, because that does not make us safer. Creating more wars in Central America and South America. We have a great deal of experience with this, actually. And what it does, whether it's a drug war or some other kind of political war, like we had the 70s, taking over Chile and, putting our guys in, these various places. What that does is it actually impacts America very badly, right? All these MAGA people, Trump, oh, we got illegal aliens that come in from the South. Well, I wonder why, in the past 5 decades that we've had that. If you look at, it's our own policy in Central and South America, which has created this conditions where people are forced to leave. They have to leave. Their choice is die or maybe die leaving. These are their 2 choices. So they make the choice, well, if I leave, maybe I won't die. So he doesn't understand that. And he is trying to shape the world thing. But again, with Trump, none of what we're talking about here as to how the history and the context, no, he doesn't care about that. Cares about deals. Cares about resources that can be turned into money, and money that can be leveraged to get more money. That's Trump's wheelhouse. This is how Trump has been successful. And he's good at it, or he was good at it. He's good at getting people to lend him money, spending it all, getting more money, spending it all, living this kind of creating the life that he's created for himself. He wants to do that for this country. It doesn't work that way. But that's all he understands. So I do think Trump is salivating at the potential of putting Machado in there and having full access, unfettered access to all the resources of Venezuela, probably their neighbors, and removing Chinese and Russian influence all at one fell swoop. Oh, and yeah, we'll bring in Cuba. Cuba will go as well. And that will make both of those things are Marco Rubio's wet dreams, as we know, right? He has been about this for a long time. Cuba first, and Venezuela is the other big one that Rubio has been hankering for so many years. And, back in the day when people would say, oh, Trump does 4D chess. Nobody says that now. You know that, right? You don't hear that. The MAGA people are done with him. They realize they've been, totally fooled. But he doesn't do 4D chess. But there is a hope, perhaps, that I can imagine, this is imaginary, not real, that because Marco Rubio wants to be president and Trump doesn't like him. Obviously, Rubio, remember the primaries, Rubio's little, they don't like each other. There's no doubt. And Rubio is not very competent in any case, that he will start something in the Caribbean, which he's already started. And then it will be a failure, but not really a full-blown war failure, but just something that, well, you know what, that didn't really work out. We're not going to do that. And then pile it on Rubio and get rid of him. That would be a Trump way to do business, fire people for cause. So maybe he's creating a cause to fire, but this is just a fantasy. Probably not the case. He wants to go in and do this. And of course, you've had guests on that understand the tactical war potential, the operational disaster that would be, of trying to take our military into Venezuela. It's a large country of very patriotic people. When you attack a country, it doesn't matter what country it is, or no matter how rotten a leader is, everybody falls in line and they love their country. And if their leader's there, they'll take him. It's the leader we got, that's what we have to fight with, and they'll do it. So, this is a disaster. But the other thing that's a disaster, the oceans off of the northern, the Atlantic, I guess, South Atlantic, whatever, they're deep oceans, and there's lots of subs in those waters. There's our subs. Sure. We got our subs. For all I know, Israel's got a sub there, but we know Russian and Chinese subs are there too. Mm-hmm. So, and they don't even have to be in the Atlantic. The isthmus is so narrow. You could have subs in the Pacific side that could take out any that carriers that are sitting there. And our aircraft carriers are such archaic machines now. Their systems are from another century, really. And they are from the 20th century, but they're actually from the early 20th century. The concept of aircraft carriers is really a World War II thing. So We haven't upgraded that. They are sitting ducks. The best thing that could happen is we could create some new coral reef things. You know how they always say when they blow up the retired ships, and say what's going to be a coral reef. That's our environmental contribution. Thank the U.S. Navy for that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, Trump has no idea of any of this. So his best bet is to quit it, pull back, say it was a big mistake, and blame it on Rubio. That's what he should do. But he's not going to.
The irony is this: when Rubio was a teenager, he stayed with his sister and his brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law was a big cocaine dealer who
right.
went to prison, and Rubio pretended as if he knew nothing about it, even though he stayed in the house where the drugs were moved at. But nobody talks about this, and Trump is saying that he is fighting narco-terrorism in Venezuela, which is absolutely insane.
That's right.
Could you?
And he pardoned the Honduran president, who was a multi-billion-dollar drug dealer, convicted in a court of law, sentenced to 30 years prison, which is pretty much for a politician, right? I mean, that's pretty serious because they had the goods on him. And 1 year, less than a year, he served, and he got a pardon at the same time that Trump's fighting a so-called narco-terror war against Maduro.
It's absolutely insane. But it's all of these things, are they symptoms of a decaying and declining and desperate empire? Are we living in the fall of the American empire? Because it seems like they're reaching and they're trying to throw anything up against the wall to see if anything will stick. And all of the old tricks and all of the old games that they used to play have been worn out. And now we see pure powers arise. We see smaller powers challenging the United States. We see that the debt burden on the U.S. economy is steadily growing. We see unemployment, homelessness. We see the defunding of veterans. We see the destruction of America's educational system, her healthcare system. Are all of these symptomatic of a falling, decaying empire? And are we living in the last days of the American empire?
They are symptoms. They're all the symptoms, and they're predictable symptoms. And we have been living in the last stages of American empire now, really since before 9/11, but 9/11, I think, would have been the sign of it. And I don't know if you talk about 9/11 on here at all.
Yes.
But 9/11, because I was in the Pentagon on that day too, so I have a little bit of eyewitness of some of that stuff. Not much, just a little bit. But 9/11, I think it's a false flag. It happened, but it was created. It was made to happen because it was necessary to justify something that the empire needed, and that was one of those throwing things against the wall. But even back 25 years ago, we were throwing up stuff against the wall. Let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. And what is it that they consider working? What they consider working is a continuation of dollar supremacy, or back then it would have been a continuation. Now they are trying to almost reestablish or hold on to what's left of dollar supremacy. But also we export 47% of all the world's weapons. That's one of our big exports. It's our biggest export, really. And you'd think a country like ours would export more oil, more farm stuff, maybe high tech, but it's not the case. It's military supplies. So this is where our economy hinges, and this is where the politicians and the media get all their money, through military industrial complex, that money, that churn. Because you think about just a couple 3 weeks ago, Zelensky's people got in trouble, right, for stealing $100 million. Well, that's a low number, and they knew about it from day one. He's trying, this comes out in the media. Oh my God, we didn't even realize it. That's because they're trying to push Zelensky into a peace deal, for a war that we made him do. Whatever. But the point I make about the 100 million is that's a drop in the bucket of how much money is you could say wasted. But I used to be all about waste, fraud, and abuse. We could just clean up the system. No. This money's in that system so people can get their hands on it, and the people that get their hands on it and profit and become billionaires or whatever, become parts of the tools of the state. That's what it's about. So we have $1 trillion military budget. And this should have revealed everything anybody need to know about Trump. First thing he does, bump up military spending for $1 trillion. They didn't even have a plan. They didn't even have the national security strategy until 2 weeks ago, right? I mean, the actual, and it was a good one in the sense that it was different than the previous one. But he budgeted them back in the spring. First thing he did, $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion, for everything they were doing in the past, all the stupid stuff, all the churn that enriches all the people that matter in this country. And then plus new stuff that he was talking about that had not been really quantified, just throwing money at it. What's he doing? Is that the most corrupt thing you can imagine? You know, here's a bunch of money. You guys take what you need, you know. This is what it's about. It's about our money. Our money is tied up in war. It's tied up in the theft of resources. We are not the productive nation that we once were, and it will be a couple decades before we become the productive nation, if we ever do. And it may not be as a whole nation. It might be as a bunch of little nations. But our productive, this thing that MAGA was so interested in, you know, putting America first, rebuilding its industrial base, you know, he's throwing money at that. That's not doing it. Okay. We don't have the workers. Our education system has been so bad for so long. We don't even, you know, every college in America has mandatory remedial work for probably 90% of their students because they can't read, write. The public school system is not producing. They're not delivering. We're paying for it, but we're not getting anything for it. Where's that money going? I mean, I don't know, but it's a system that we've evolved into that has weakened our country. And Trump fed on that because Americans know our countries are not in good shape in so many different ways. So they vote for Trump. But what Trump do to solve it? Oh, I'm going to give $1 trillion to the military, and then we're going to get in a war with Venezuela, and we're going to fight some wars over in the Middle East. Everything they had been doing. So it is desperate. They are throwing stuff up against the wall to see if it, you know, throwing spaghetti on the wall, see if it sticks. They're doing that. But it's about less so. It's really about the money. It's about our dollar. You know, the Fed. Every month when they do sales, more and more the Fed has to buy its own, Treasury has to buy its own, it has to buy its own debt. What does it buy its debt with? Vapor. It doesn't even bother printing the bills. It just vapor. Okay, we'll take that. So it's imaginary money. When you, as an empire, and this is a sign of the real end of empire, it's when their money collapses. You know, a lot of things happen up until that point, including wars and stupid things and terrible politicians and massive glorification of the government, you know, like this, you know, and I don't want to pick on Trump about his ballroom, right? because he said his ballroom is paid for by other people, and that's fine. It's paid for by his rich friends, right? Which also tells us something about our government, right? It should be paid for by his rich friends. Everything else they do is paid for by, you know, but this kind of vanity, you know, kind of a showmanship. This is also what you see at the end of empire, kind of excess at the top. So we're definitely seeing that. But the real end of it is, and the real war is about our dollar, because we have lived on the productivity of the rest of the world, particularly China, but also many other countries. And we have this dollar, and they have trusted it. And they've said, we want some of that. We want that dollar because that will help us grow. Well, now there's alternatives, not just in the Bitcoin realm or anything like that, or people going to gold, but there are actual state currencies and baskets of currency, BRICS. To some extent, the euro served as that, a little bit of a competition. And of course, what did Trump do with the Ukraine war? He broke Europe, right? I mean, this is the objective of the Ukraine war for Trump. Maybe not for the Europeans. They probably thought, oh yeah, Russia's going to come get us. We got to fight them. We have to, you know, expand NATO and own everybody. You know, Europeans are trying to own Russia. Very idiotic of them to try to do that. But And we are like egging them on. That's a great idea. Meanwhile, we are separating Europe from Russian energy, separating Europe from Russian investment and Russian trade and Russian raw materials, forcing Europe. Well, you can't deal with them. And of course you wouldn't want to because they're going to kill you. You hate Russia. And then we bring them into our economic orbit. Why would we do that, right? We're not producing a lot of stuff. We bring them into our economic orbit to support the dollar. That is supporting our government. You know, that dollar is not supporting the American people. You know, American people are like, oh, well, we're glad we're Americans. We have a dollar. Really? Because, you know, there's a great article out by a guy named Green, and he examined the poverty line calculations. That was 1963 is when they first came up with this idea of a poverty line. and I forget what it was. But it was calculated. There was a calculation that they used. And he said, if we did that now, I mean, he wrote a very compelling article, but the bottom line is, if we calculated a new poverty line for a family of four, let's say a family of four, because that was kind of what they used, it would be over $130,000 a year. Over $130,000 in income for a family. So you look at most Americans, whether they're single, couples, families, 130,000, we would say, oh, you're solidly upper middle class. And yet, if you listen to Dave Ramsey, I don't know if anybody ever listened to Dave Ramsey. He runs on our radio. I listen to him sometimes. These people call in, and they're broke off. They're broke. They're in debt. They're broke. They got every little problem you could think of. They can't make ends meet. Big problems. And he says, "What do you make?" And they go, "I make 140. I make 150." And old people like me, who back in the day went 130, boy, you're rich. But our dollar has vaporized. It has no value. It has no purchasing power. But you look at that amount and you think, well, surely they could just stop eating out or do this or that, right? And they really can't. And this article by this guy named Green, I'll send that to you when we're done here. It's really good. It just came out. I know other people have seen it. It's like out and about. But he makes a really compelling case that this is insane. And our country, and what it tells us is the people in our country much worse shape economically, in terms of their choices, in terms of any opportunities that they might have. We know nobody can buy a house. The average age of a first-time home purchase now is in their 40s. And that's not normal. That's not historically normal, but it does reflect the crappy value of our currency. But the empire needs that currency. It doesn't have an alternative. Now they can go bankrupt, but then they can't borrow anymore, right? Or they can lose face, and then we won't be the top dog military country in the world. So they have options that would prevent disaster, prevent war, transition us in this country to a much more stable economic position for all the people. Those options exist, but they're not going to be chosen by Washington. They know only a few things. Print money, spend vapor, put it on our grandkids or just the end of this country at some point, make war, threaten war, beef up the military, threaten everybody, and then control resources everywhere you can. And Trump has done Europe. He's got Europe as a new customer base, a captive customer base for American energy and American products. And now he wants Venezuela with the largest oil reserves on the planet, larger than the Saudi Middle Eastern oil. It's not sweet. It's hard to process, but he doesn't care. It's known to be there, and he wants it. He wants it to subsidize the money to make people say, oh, well, the dollar's still good because they own half the energy on the planet. Well, and China and Russia both, what they're doing for energy, and we're not doing this. We're talking about doing this. We're not doing it. China and Russia are both developing their nuclear energy sector in a variety of different ways, making it smaller, portable, safer. Their new missile. They got a new missile. And again, I wish that we weren't competing in war with China and Russia, because they're outdoing us. Okay. If we keep doing this, we're going to lose for sure. But, their latest missile, long-range missile, I forget the name of it, powered by a small nuclear. It carries nuclear material because that's what powers it. It's not a nuclear weapon. I guess you could put a nuclear payload on it, but it's powered by a small nuclear engine. So this is where the capability is. I think the latest from China is they've got a new kind, thorium salt reactor, another small nuclear thing, and it works in a very unique process, very innovative. It's all science and physics. I don't know how it works, but they're doing that kind of thing with their money, and we're trying to take over countries and steal their oil with our money, what's left of it. But no, they're trying to save the dollar, this whole thing. And when an empire is panicked about its currency and it's trying to save it, it can't do anything else. It makes war. And that's what we're doing. And of course, this is what Americans need to be worried about, because when this country makes war, which we are doing nonstop and continuing to do, it always comes home and it costs us even more. So if you're poor today, because you're below the real poverty line, you have less than 130K coming in to support you and your family. That means you're below the poverty line. So let's just call you poor. You don't have a lot of options. War is going to make you a lot poorer. So if you don't like the way you're having to live now, like I can't go and buy, fast food, and I can't get a bag of chips because I really got to save it for, whatever we can eat that'll fill us up better. It's going to get worse for you. It's going to get worse for you because our empire is dying and Trump is trying to save it when what he should be doing is trying to end it. And he really could. Would not be easy in this country because the power is not just the president's power, but not only, he doesn't even want to. Trump doesn't even want to. He's not even thinking about this. He's saying, I'm going to reshape and strengthen our empire. That's what he's saying. Anyway, it's bad news and people need to wake up. We can't control Trump. And also this idea, the state says, I'll kill people and then we'll change you. We'll make you do something because I'm going to do a demonstration shot on, let's say, a Charlie Kirk or a Candace Owens or a Tucker Carlson or anybody else that questions. We'll blow up we'll kill journalists, just as Israel does in Gaza, right? Their main target, in addition to children and women and pregnant people, was journalists. This is what they wanted to do, and this is what they've done. So this is our government's policy as well. And I just want to say one last thing because people got to know it if they don't already. Our domestic policies in this country, as well as our military policies in this country, are being Zionized. They are being modeled after the IDF. This thing, Trump was surprised and unsettled, I think, a little bit when he found out we were shooting people that were hanging off of boats, coming back after we already blew their boat up, coming back to inspect the damage, saw some guys hanging off, like, hey, don't shoot me. And we shot him. Okay. This is how the IDF operates. And we've seen it in real time throughout Gaza. In the West Bank, we see the same thing. In Lebanon, we see the same thing. This is how Israel fights its neighbors. And I won't say enemies because Israel's enemies are all its neighbors because it continually kills them and steals their land. So it has created enemies, certainly in its region and around the world. And it fights them in this way. And this is IDF policy. This is how they train them to do it. This is how they make their moral and ethical decision. You kill the survivors. Even if they're Jewish, sometimes if you have to, you do the Hannibal directive. You kill your own people because that's what we do. Okay. I don't care what Israel does. Israel does that. But unfortunately, they are training our military officers. They are training our policemen. Okay. This ICE thing, I don't follow the domestic as much, but I'm more interested in what's, when the next nuclear bomb is going to go off. But, the ICE thing, I was surprised to find they're masking themselves. I mean, but if you look at any video coming out of Gaza or coming out of Israel, all the Israeli IDF officers mask themselves. They all mask because they don't want to be seen. They don't want to be incriminated by their criminal acts. And I'm not saying ICE people are doing criminal acts, but when you mask yourself, you have already drawn the line, right? You can't know who I am. I'm government. You can't know who I am, but I can know who you are. Your mask is illegal. My mask is legitimate. We're done for. This is un-American. It is unconstitutional, and that's how we're behaving. But where do we get these ideas? Most of these ideas, we didn't generate them. They come from our best friend in the whole world, which is Israel, and the wars and the way that Israel pursues and fights its own wars, which we fund, of course. We are connected to them in so many ways, but we are modeling some really bad and un-American behavior. And I think, what can we do about it? Well, we certainly can't vote our way out of it, right? That's impossible to do. So Americans need to sit back and think about some choices that they're going to need to make. Our government is not for us, which most people have known that for a long time in different ways, but it's very obviously not even for us. It's not of us. Our government is not part of us. It is not representative of the average American person in this country. Because the average American person says, I don't think cops should be wearing masks. Am I wrong there? Because I don't think they should be wearing masks. To me, that's really weird, right? They're public servants. They shouldn't be shooting people. And we shouldn't be shooting people in the water. But the IDF does it. So the people in Washington think it's just fine. It is illegal to do that. So we have a big problem. We're going broke. The empire's panicked about it, and it's going to do anything it can to save itself, and it will kill all of us in that process. It does not care. Washington is not connected to the people.
Mm. Thank you, everybody, for the super chats. Earthling 384F, M Sparks, and I can't. Is that at Olaf? My screen is jumping, so I'm sorry.
Yeah,
My screen is jumping.
Olaf's daughter. It looks like an Icelandic name, maybe.
Okay, yeah. Because it's on my end, my screen keeps jumping. But and I know who that is. I think that's Vera, if I'm not mistaken. But in closing, I would like to say I've often said that the United States, she is like a snake with the head cut off, and it's the head still has poison in it, so they have to bury the head because it can still inject poison in you after the head is chopped off. But the body still contorts for hours after the head has been disconnected until rigor mortis set in. And and when we look at it, as you talked about the U.S. dollar, when the world went off the gold and silver standard, the financial doom of America and England was sealed because these two countries, they had their money back. The U.S. had her dollar and backed by gold, and the pound sterling was backed by silver. And now we see that the rigor mortis is setting in, and desperation is setting in to the leadership because they see that they can no longer force their policies on everybody else. And as you say, they're becoming more desperate and more anxious about it. Do you think that they're prepared to burn down everything to keep anyone else from becoming equal to or ascending to the position that they once had?
I mean, that's a risk. That's a risk. A lot of people are looking at the European, the EU leadership, the NATO leadership that wants to take on Russia. They can't even raise any of those countries together. You put all their soldiers they could raise together, they wouldn't be half or a quarter the size of the Russian army. And they're not trained to fight, and they haven't fought. They've done colonial policing. That's about it. All they've done. They don't know how to fight. And so they'll be slaughtered. It is totally irrational to think they will raise an army, an EU army or NATO army against Russia, but they're talking like that. And people, the Russians, the Russian leadership or whatever, the commentators, and I think some of the Europeans recognize these leaders, certainly in France, Germany, and in England, are paranoid. They're very unpopular, and they're going to lose power. We're seeing these other populist and sometimes nationalist parties emerge as popular in their various European countries, and they're winning elections despite our efforts here and in Europe to kind of ban parties and make sure candidates can't run, throw them in jail, whatever. But the peoples are changing, and so the people at the top of Europe right now making decisions are vulnerable. They're politically vulnerable. They don't want to lose their positions, which I don't understand because they're already rich. They can go live somewhere, and most of them are old. So just leave. Just leave. But they don't want to, and the language that they're espousing is war language. Macron is like, your children will fight Russia and they will die for France or something. And it's like, what? Okay, nobody in France is like buying that. But so something is going on there, and they are desperate. The politicians are desperate. Can they initiate a nuclear event? We know Ukraine could. Ukraine has done a lot of, and the Mossad works in Ukraine too. So between the Mossad, Ukraine, the American CIA, MI6, lots of false flags could happen. And that's one of the things desperate people do. You try to change the table, right? Let's say, let's go ahead and flip something so that we then will have the upper hand. And starting or having a nuclear event, or even they could do a biological event. That also extremely possible, really anywhere in the world, but in Europe or in this country, very possible that could be done. And then the people are scared. So how can we scare the people? And I think that's what they're in the process of doing. Europeans, how can we scare Europeans? They're doing a good job. Russia's going to come and kill your children, rape your women, occupy your property, and you're going to be speaking Russian. So they're trying to scare them, but Europeans aren't buying it. But a nuclear weapon or a deadly contagious virus or bacteria of some sort will frighten people to the extent that they can be controlled by these evil politicians. And that's what they are. They're evil politicians. And I would input Trump in that too. I don't like to call people evil, but what Trump is doing is part and parcel of what Europe is doing. You know, he is scaring people, making war to maintain power, maintain the dollar in his case, to maintain this country's preeminent position, even though it's mostly gone. And it's in rigor mortis, which I love because that is true. And I think we're feeling that, you know, we're seeing it. The Americans sense it. They might not. I'm glad you put it the way you did, because we need to think about what that means to our own lives. And what do we do when there's a dead animal that's already started to decay in our driveway? We get rid of it. We kick it aside. We're not scared of it anymore. If it was a snake and it was alive, we might be very frightened, but we're not once it's dead. And it is dead. Still, the head's dangerous, but the rest of it is not there. So that's good for us to think about. But fear is powerful. We saw this during COVID. You know, COVID was the death rate and the infection death, you know, infected to death rate was tiny. It was smaller than the normal flu, but they were able to take that fear and mass, you know, spread it and make it massive. That many people acted against their better judgment. Very few people took their better judgment and said, no, we're not messing with it. Rest of them obeyed. That's what fear does, fear and propaganda. So we as people really have to recognize where we're at, end of empire. It's going to fail. When will it fail? It's failing right now. But what will it do as it tries to avoid the end? It will make us very frightened. It will try to extract everything it can from the world, and that includes us, our people, our children. You know, there could be a draft coming. Can you imagine? That would be actually delightful, because I don't think anybody would go. Which I honestly think why they don't do a draft, and I don't support a draft. I think it's slavery. I think the 13th Amendment outlawed a draft. You know, you can't take people and force them to do something. That's what a draft is. So I'm opposed to the draft in principle, but I think one of the reasons they haven't done it is because it would be the grand curtain pulled away, because nobody would show up. I don't know any kid that would show up. What young person under the age of 35 would report to duty because they got a letter from the government? It probably wouldn't even get opened. So it's but anyway, so they're not doing that because they are afraid. But we need to prepare, and we need to mentally prepare, because there are some really bad things that can happen, and I'm sure the governments in Europe and in Washington are looking at it. How do we frighten people into submission? Many ways they can do it, and dangerous ways. But I think we have to recognize Gaza tells us everything we need to know. If you didn't see it on real time, as the whole entire world watched, as Israel turned Gaza into a nuclear holocaust without nukes. I mean, it was the equivalent of 6 to 8 nuclear weapons, and they've destroyed a very tiny strip of land that had 2.3 million people on it at one time. Does not have 2.3 million people on it now. We don't have the count. I think it's far less than what they're saying, and they're starving them. They're not sheltering them. They're not abiding by the stupid Trump peace plan, which wasn't a peace plan at all. They're still taking the property. But they're murdering the people, men, women, and children. They're doing it in an open site. They're murdering journalists. They're killing doctors, blowing up hospitals, taking away everything that would sustain and secure human life. They've done it for over 2 years on a pretext. The pretext, October 7th. That's a pretext. I don't care what anybody says. They let that happen. And Charlie Kirk got shot because he said it. A year and a half ago, he said, I've been to Israel. You can get anywhere to any Israeli border in 45 minutes in a car. And driving on Israeli roads, not Palestinian roads. Palestinian roads, it might take 4 hours. But for an Israeli, the roads will take you anywhere you need to go. And he said, those borders are locked up tight at all times. And he said, there was a stand down on the southern border right across from where the October 7th attack took place. And why was that? And he asked this book. He said, I don't know why, but it doesn't seem right. And of course, it doesn't seem right. And as a result of that, they murdered probably 500,000, maybe 6 or 750,000 men, women, and children, starved them, making them sick, denying them health care, denying them shelter. All of this is inhuman. It is illegal. The UN has sat back with very few exceptions and tolerated it. We let that happen. Okay, we don't know Palestinians. That's okay. Israel's our friend. That's okay. We're funding it. We're making money off of it. That's okay. Okay, when it comes to Arkansas, when it comes to West Virginia, when it comes to Oregon, because those people didn't accept their draft notices or whatever it was, that's acceptable now. Total destruction by a government, men, women, and children, property, animals, all environmental life, water contamination. Everything that they did there can be duplicated by any other expansionist empire. So, and that's our best ally. They're training our military. They're training our cops. They own our politicians. They own our Congress. They own the president. So wake up. You can wake up to that, because, you know, we can say, oh, that's far away. I think it's tragic that they've done this to the Gazans for no reason. They're killing innocent people, and they're doing it purposely. And we say, well, that's over there. No, it's not. That's our best ally, and they run this country, okay? They are taking full advantage of Trump's corollary in South America. Israel has a new, have you heard of the Isaac Accords that Argentinian President Milei has put forth? It's the Abraham Accords for South America, okay? So everybody has to love Israel. Everybody has to obey the United States. That's their agenda. I don't think they can cash. I think they've written a check they can't cash. But that doesn't mean when they lose, when they totally accept defeat, that it's going to come back home. And just recognize your enemy is Washington. Our enemy is very much closer to home than they are telling us.
You hit this out of the park, Colonel. I got to get you back on soon. You hit this out of the park. I want to thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Don't forget to send me that, and I'll send you a copy of the video.
I'll send you that poverty line article. It's very, very good, and I was educated by it because I hadn't paid much attention to that. I was shocked.
Okay, and I'll send you the video. And be blessed, be safe, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it so much.
Everybody, listen, I want to thank each and every one of you for giving us your time today, because time is the most precious resource, because it's unrenewable. Remember, I said that. So we hope that in return for your time, you've gotten an equal or greater payoff. And as I always say to each and every one of you, do right by others, not because there's some material gain to be had or some accolades behind it. Do right to others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember, God Almighty is watching you. And as my late, great, and beautiful mother would always say, God sits high on the throne of power, but he looks low at the actions of men. So I want to say to you all, I love you all from the bottom of my heart if you love truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. And before we go off the air, remember to join us again at 2:00 p.m. Central Time, as we have CIA analyst Larry Johnson on the platform, and we'll be going into more stuff on the Russia situation, the Ukrainian situation. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Peace. We're out of here.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last mistake. I'm blue without your face. But what can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment.